Hello and welcome to Unleashed, the show that explores how to thrive as an independent professional. I'm your host, Will Bachman, and I'm so excited to be here today with Bob Glazer, who is the author of Friday Forward, Inspiration and Motivation to End Your Week Stronger Than It Started. And Bob was on the show on episode 262 talking about his previous book, Elevate, and it's great, Bob, to have you back. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Will. Good to be here.
So, really inspired by your book, which is a collection of some of the pieces that you send out in your weekly email, Friday Forward. Some listeners may be familiar with it, maybe subscribers, but why don't you give the capsule on how the Friday Forward emails got started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it got started as just a note that I had gone to a pretty intensive leadership program. Got convinced that changing my morning routine was going to be important, and part of that suggested routine was writing and reading, and ideally reading something positive and taking some time to think. Some of the things that we were given as positive reading weren't really my cup of tea. They were a little too rainbow and unicorny for me. So I decided to sort of combine the activities a couple months later and just start a note to my team on Fridays, and it was called Friday Inspiration. And I sent it for a few weeks or months, and I wasn't sure if anyone was reading it. And then I did start to hear comments back and positive things that people told me they were doing and that they liked it. And also, interestingly, that they were sharing it outside the company with friends or spouses or siblings or their businesses. I had mentioned the concept to a couple other CEOs, and they told me to sort of put them on the list and they take a look at it. It was under the context of really doing the same thing themselves, and they said, "Oh, we'll just send this to our team." So at that point, I thought it might have some external value, and I kind of opened it up, threw some friends and family on it, and it just kind of took off from there. Someone wrote an article, "This is the only newsletter I read every week," and in ink, and it got a couple thousand subscribers in a week. And a couple years later, there were over 100,000 people in 60 countries getting Friday Forward.
So, to give listeners an overview of the book, you have it divided into four sections: spiritual capacity, intellectual capacity, physical capacity, and then emotional capacity. And I think that's the same division that you used in your last book, Elevate. How did you come up with that framework? When did that form for you?
Well, I wrote the Friday Forward book. It was sort of resoundingly turned down by everyone because, as told publishers don't like compilations, and the person who eventually become my agent said, love these writing, loves this story. What's the story behind the stories? And I actually took some time to really think about what is it about these emails that are resonating with people I don't know, that are helping them get better? What did I really done personally over the last couple of years to elevate my life, and how is our company growing by how we are investing in our team? And then also, like, a lot of the sort of high achievers that I admired, like what were the patterns there? And like all four of those roads led me back to the same things. I circled themes and things that I saw, and I realized like that's what we had been doing in Acceleration Partners. We've been helping people build their capacity, and we had been doing it across these dimensions. And the Friday Forwards really all fell across one or more of those capacities. So Elevate was really the framework of capacity building. I still loved the stories, and so I was able to go back and pick sort of the 52 most impactful ones and update them and tie them to the capacity. So for people who haven't read Elevate or who read Elevate and they're in on the theory, I think the stories give them just some practical examples of this stuff in play.
One thing I noted in this book is that just about every one of these chapters is built around a interesting anecdote or a very specific person or story. And I'd love to know, how do you go about sort of capturing those? I'm currently taking this course from Tiago Forte called Building a Second Brain that talks about, this, it's a whole note-taking system. So I'm curious about how writers like yourself, find an anecdote? Do you store it away somewhere? Do you take notes and say, well, this might be useful someday, I'm not sure how? I'd love to know
Yeah.
how you're accumulating these nuggets, these stories.
Yeah, I mean, my brain fires all the time. Something comes and something goes. That's one of the things. Creativity is that's not something I lack as ideas. So, yeah, what's interesting is I'll sometimes something just happens, and now because my brain is wired that way, I think I'm looking for them. I'm listening a little more, but. Yeah, I keep a pretty long Evernote, or actually OneNote now, list of concepts or ideas. But the winning formula seems to be when like there was a concept that I'd already thought of or is interesting I want to write about, and then there's a story or an anecdote that happens or something, and it sort of brings it to life. So a lot of times something will happen, and I'll go back to that, and I'll be like, oh yeah, I wanted to write about this, like a feedback of one thing, and then something like perfect example. So the notion of feedback of one, which was the Friday Forward from last week, which was actually surprisingly more popular than I expected. Feedback of one, something I had heard in the past, it was interesting or whatever, and then I actually got like some personal feedback of one a couple weeks ago from a Friday Forward reader that I thought was much more to do with their personal preferences than what actually most Friday Forward readers would want, and I was going to kind of ignore that feedback. So it was like the perfect way to bring those two things together.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you about a specific example. So there's a chapter I really like about called World Class, and it's about Anne Muraco, who talks about
that's a favorite one.
Yeah, that's a really cool one. So, what was the story behind that Friday Forward issue? So, did you kind of come across her story and then save it away from somewhere, and then and eventually pull it out, or do you?
Well, that one I actually heard it. So excellence is a pretty common theme, and I had a very popular other one that's in the book on excellent about the plumber Daniel.
Yeah.
So again, like I'm probably like I listened for that, and so I heard her interviewed very long interview, and that was like a story she told, and so I went and sort of researched the story a little bit, and it tied into some notes and some other things that I had. So I actually happened to hear her tell that story first person, and I just thought it was like a perfect example of what that principle.
And in a case like that, is it you hear it on Monday and you say, oh, okay, this would be good for this week, and you bang it out, and then that's that Friday? Or did you hear it and take notes?
I don't write them until that week, but I have them. Sometimes I have them mentally stacked.
Okay.
So I don't start writing until Sunday or Monday. It's a pretty rigid process at this point that actually is one of these kind of keystone habits where like it becomes a habit that sort of forms other habits. So I don't need any reminders. It's just kind of like Sunday or Monday is draft day. But sometimes I have them like virtually stacked or in my head 2 to 3 weeks. And I'm like, oh, but timing wise, this one would be better. So I'm actually like through a stack at the end of this week. So, barring something triggering an idea in the next week, I will go back to my sort of like idea list that I've been holding on to, and then I'll pull something from one of those.
So you maintain a running idea list of, oh, this is a core.
Yeah, I've got about 70 or 80 things on this list that were some are a story or an anecdote or something where I'm waiting for the missing piece, but it's funny. I don't get very deep into them. Like I kind of feel like Friday Forward is a little like Law and Order. Like if you rip from the headlines, you never run out of topics.
And I've experienced this myself. Just if you have an outlet where you're publishing regularly, you tend to be more observant, and you're kind of more aware, and you're out there looking for things. So I think you actually have more ideas. Have you experienced that since you started?
Like I said, I think your antenna goes up for it. And look, even people around me will joke, like I'm on a over the hill soccer league, and we came back one week, and they're like, oh, we're going to be the story of perseverance this week. So people send me stuff. Some of the Daniel the plumber story was actually sent to me by a reader. The the Mary Claire King one on Bad Week was actually sent to me by someone, and they said, "Oh, you'll love this." So I get some help from the community. But yeah, I do think the antenna is just a little higher for me. Sort of, it's almost a subconscious thing.
Reading the book, it seems to me like you have that you're quite active, and you mentioned several times about that you've been at a conference, been at this event. You talk about that you were at a Mastermind dinner in New York City in one of the chapters. You
Yeah.
talk about going to a Getting Clarity session at a where you met Philip McKernan. Those are maybe just a couple examples, but are you regularly, at least pre-COVID, going to, just making sure you're getting exposed to new ideas? Tell us about your sort of process or set of conferences that you're going to, social events that you're going to, and why you do them, how you choose them.
Yeah, that's the intellectual capacity realm for me, and yeah, I mean sometimes I'm attending growth-oriented conferences or speaking at them, and I have a few different of these kind of mastermind organizations that I'm in. Like to me, those are almost the best combination of sort of learning and accountability and peers. And some of those organizations bring in speakers that they know will resonate, based on the group. So, yeah, well, one thing that's interesting is I probably, that's still going on. I haven't traveled in a couple of months. That some of the groups are still meeting, online. I did one yesterday, but I don't expect to go back to as much travel than I did. I think a lot of people are realizing, they maybe it was a little more than they wanted to be doing. But yeah, I just try to put myself in environments where there's other great people and learners and thinkers and people want to discuss ideas, and that's where you hear something new or something that kind of solidifies an idea for you.
Tell me more about the mastermind groups that you belong to. Sort of how many people are there? Is this an ongoing regular group with the same set of people? I'm curious to hear about practically how those are run and what you get out of them.
Yeah, they're different versions. I think they're smaller or larger, but it was sort of coined by Napoleon Hill, and it's in a group that's really about elevating the group and individuals together of people who are on similar kind of values and missions. So, there's groups like Young Presidents Organization, YPO and EO. The forum construct is really a mastermind group. It's actually a theme construct that a lot of self-help groups use, like AA or otherwise, right? A confidential group of peers. So I'm in a couple of those, and then I'm in like another organization of really kind of just growth-oriented people. They have a big event every year that obviously haven't happened, but the group stays in touch and is always helping each other out and ideas for each other. And then I'm in something that Marshall Goldsmith put together called 100 Coaches, it's really like an organization of thinkers and givers, people who want to help each other. And I just feel like I'm on the phone once a week with someone in that group where, we're interested in the same stuff. Everyone is, wants to help each other. One person's, publishing a book, and the 20 others will help them interview them and get it out there. So it's an incredible group of people focused on the leadership realm. So, yeah, a few different ones. Even I've noticed, I've really pushed the concept with my exec team. So I think everyone on my exec team has almost like an industry peer group, right? So if it's the CFO, he meets with a group of these other CFOs. If it's the head culture officer, she has this quarterly group with all these different culture people from different companies, and they share ideas and best practices. And I think they found it like incredibly helpful, to have that kind of access.
I want to go through some of the different sections of the book. So in spiritual capacity, you define spiritual capacity in a bit of a different way than you might often see the word spiritual used, which is, you say spiritual capacity is about who we are and what we want most in life. Building spiritual capacity means truly getting to know ourselves and aligning our lives based on that knowledge. I found that quite profound. Tell me a bit about how you came to that thinking about spiritual capacity and being spiritual?
Yeah, I always preface not religious, but having gone through millions and not millions, but maybe 100 discussions with people in different terms, it just was the one that most encompassed the concept, and it's just sort of what is your North Star and your compass, and I think a lot of people are driving around pretty quickly without that figured out, and I think once you're able to articulate your core values and you're clear about what you want, a lot of other things fall into place. But most people will go through their life never having done that. I think we all have core values. Most of us can't articulate them. We just get a sense or a feeling when we say like it's like you hit the electric fence and you get electrocuted. You're like, oh, shouldn't be doing that. Or you get in the zone where you're doing something really aligned to your core values and it feels awesome and you have that sort of flow sense. Well, you're kind of doing that by feel versus saying like, oh, these are the things that are true for me, and I need to align my life around these principles because this is going to produce the best result. And when I'm forced to go against these principles, it's not going to go well. So I just think that if people can figure that out, it is really a game changer for everything that comes after.
One chapter in that section that I liked was the Breaking Bad section, where you talk about be clear about what you're not going to be good at. Tell me a bit about that, and maybe what are the things that you've decided not to be good at?
Yeah, I struggled with that for a while. I think the more is more approach. I still struggle with it, but that actually aligned a lot to the sort of feedback of one, which is like, if you're trying to make everyone happy, you're not going to make anyone happy, I think. But once you're clear on what you want, you're okay to not make the wrong people unhappy, right? Which is, I believe in these things. I believe in this mission. I believe in this product. It serves this purpose. Like, Southwest, which was an example in there, they have a value proposition that's very different from maybe a, Delta or Singapore Airlines. And the ideal customer for one should not like another. So yeah, I mean, for me, the things that just stopping doing things, outsourcing things. One of the examples I've give is like I was very kind of ADD kid. Like traditional school wasn't very engaging for me. Hard time sitting in class. Like didn't learn well in that environment. Like I kind of stopped going to these back to school nights years ago for my kids. Like it's like right back to being in school for me, for not paying any attention, jittery, want out of there. And I'm like, it just doesn't add value for me or for them. So like, I'm just giving up the guilt on that and say, look, that's just not there's so many other ways I can be there for my kids except for going to back to school night.
Yeah. I mean, when I read that chapter, I reflected on some of the things that I've decided not to be good at. One of them is Twitter. I spent about 4 months this year just spending a lot of time reading Twitter, and then I took a couple courses on how do you build a following on Twitter, and I decided there that like a lot of people that I really respect say, oh, there's so much value. I love the conversations. I've met so many friends here, and I respect that, but I wasn't able to kind of figure that out, or it seemed like it was just too much of an investment. So I said, okay, I'm going to take a bit of a break from Twitter because it just seemed like, wow, it's really a lot of work to get to, several thousand followers even.
Right, and that's the right decision for you. It doesn't mean it's the right decision for the next person.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not.
If you're clear on what your goals and what you want, if your goal is to become a social media maven, then probably need to figure out Twitter.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I mean, I'm not going to definitely. I mean, I have a pretty large number of connections on LinkedIn. I post there regularly, and that that maybe format or the nature of it just sort of suits my personal needs more. I mean, it's fascinating. I could spend hours just sitting there, reading the feed, but all the political news, especially, was just making me anxious.
One thing I've heard from a lot of like thought leaders and big people lately is like they use social media as a creator, as a way to share ideas and stuff, but they just don't consume it.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting, and that they realize that there's a cost to all the time on consuming it versus saying, look, this is a place of content distribution for me.
Well, I think that was my original idea. But at least what I learned is, and I think you can do that if you're, Daniel Pink or Malcolm Gladwell or something, and you already have a following.
Already have,
But
yeah,
if you
yeah.
enter it and you start with 0 followers, or you have your, 5 close friends follow you or something, you can post on there all day long, really fantastic content, and just no one's going to engage on it. So it's a little bit like
Yeah,
shouting
then
into
it's
the
like a
wind.
full-time job
Yeah.
to do that. Yeah.
Let's talk a bit about intellectual capacity. And there you have one that you talk about life hacks. And you almost might call them anti hacks because you have this long list of them. It made me laugh out loud. Like your writing hack was write every day for years. So, like that's the hack. Tell me a bit about your perspective on all these life hacks that are out there.
Yeah. So the there's one on that. The life hacking is, I, so it's, I, I'm split on this one. Like I'm a big believer, and I talk a lot about the 80-20 rule. So I think there is finding like the few things that matter most, but the the hacking as, so to me that's like a good hack. Like, and Tim Ferriss has spent a lot of time, I think, in a lot of disciplines trying to figure out like what's the 20% that gets you 80% of the outcome. Like I'm not sure it's a hack; it's more of a smart focus. But the example, is a story of someone who, related to what we were just talking about, hired a social media consultant, and they were talking about like how to get more visitors to the content, and they gave them like 15 things that they could do. Not one of them was like write good content. And so all these shortcuts that are designed around to the sort of world class, or get around like actually doing the work or doing a good job, like they tend to be a little bit of the snake oil stuff that people sell. So there is definitely some truth in the 80-20 or optimization or things that help make good things better. I mean, a book is a perfect example. I give this example to people a lot. So people put a ton of work into the launch of their book because momentum is momentum. If you make lists, then more stores stock more books that are on lists, and there's definitely a flywheel effect. But you can spend a ton of money and have your book have a great first week, and it could suck. And then when that's done, no one will ever read it again, and it's gone. Similarly, you don't have to have a big first week, but if it gets out there, and some of the books that have built up over time, like Hal Elrod's Miracle Morning, if they're good, they'll sort of build themselves up over time, and they'll do really well. But obviously, if you've written a good book and you can optimize its launch, that would be the best of both worlds. So I think it's a good example of both of those principles.
Moving on to the physical capacity section, in the environmental effect chapter, you have this quote from B.J. Fogg, which I love, and I'm a big follower of hers. His The Tiny Habits.
Yeah.
And the quote is, "There's just one way to radically change your behavior: radically change your environment." Talk to me a bit about that, and maybe some ways that you've changed your physical environment.
Yeah, I think there's a simple premise, which is if you want to do less of something, put yourself in environments that reduce it. If you want to do more of something, put yourself in environments that increase it. And, let's say you want to cut back on drinking and your friends go out to the bar 5 days a week. Like, it's going to take a lot of work to go out to the bar and not drink with them versus not going out with those friends. So, I mean, I try to constantly adjust the environment. If I don't want to eat something, I don't buy it in the house. I've learned world's best dieting trick. Like, don't buy it if you don't want to eat it, and try to schedule and do things that I'm more inclined to do the things that I want to do and less inclined to not otherwise. So, I schedule in when I want to do my exercise and stuff, or else it's not going to fit itself in. But I think that, even think about like where you live, or, do you go on a vacation that's in an active place? Because if so, you're likely to be active. If you go on a cruise ship, you're likely to be sedentary. So I think there's a lot of decisions that you can make about the environment based on the outcomes that you're looking for. And a lot of the environment is the people that you're that you're with too. So that ties to emotional capacity, but I think that's something we can all pay attention to.
Yeah, I mean that chapter resonated with me in that quote. What following B.J. Fogg, and I took his Tiny Habits course, his free course, which I recommend. If you just I think Google Tiny Habits, you can get it. We started just and I don't love to eat vegetables. I know I should, and I don't love to eat them, but we started just having some cut carrots and celery and fennel and peppers and so forth laid out for early in the morning so that they're there at lunchtime. And in lunchtime now I basically just will typically eat raw vegetables, maybe a little bit of hummus, and because it's just already there, it's sitting out and it's the easiest decision. I found that with my office, if my office is all messy and so forth, just my thinking is messy. So kind of
yeah, I actually have done a similar thing in the past. Someone recommended like on Sunday night, like when you get all your groceries, like cut it all up, prep it, like so there's no work. And then it's reason why we grab snack food is because it's easy, right? Versus if you have a bunch of cucumbers or whatever laid out, then you might be likely to grab those.
Yeah, absolutely. In emotional capacity, you have a chapter on with gratitude. Tell me how you have worked to kind of develop or get a greater appreciation of gratitude in your life.
Yeah, so COVID-19 has been a really interesting thing in this. I think that everyone's under a lot of stress. Everyone's under a lot of pressure. I wrote a story that is not in the book. It's in the sort of mini book. But it was this notion of, I think, kind of like uphill or downhill, right? I think you can have this approach of like all this, stuff is rolling down onto me, woe is me. Or you can kind of look down the hill and be like, there's definitely someone worse than me in lots of ways, and I should be grateful. And those are just lenses that you can choose really simply, right? And I think the whole notion of gratitude is you're looking downhill, being like, oh, like things could be worse, not looking uphill at the stuff rolling at you, saying, oh, woe is me. And I think that's a mindset, and I think I said somewhere in Elevate, I think it's hard to be fearful and kind of grateful at the same time. So if you're focused on what you have and fundamentally grateful for that and how you can give back, it's very different than kind of opposite, in fact, of more of a victim mentality.
In another chapter in that section, it's called Rose, Thorn, and Bud, and I love this practice that you've adopted with your family, where you talk about the best part of the day, that's the rose, the worst part of the day, that's the thorn, and then note something that we're looking forward to, that's the bud. I love that idea, that practice. Tell me a little bit about how you started doing that and what it's like in practice.
Yeah, so look, I remember as a kid, my parents would be like, "How are your day?" And it's like, it's good, right? It's just like a meaningless conversation. And so I was at someone's house and they did this, and we started it with our kids, and it just created such more meaningful conversation, which was the rose was sort of what's the best part of your day, and the thorn was the worst, and the bud was something you're looking forward to. And a lot of times it was the worst thing or the thorn that I learned something that they weren't telling us otherwise, or I got in a huge fight with my friend today, or this guy was mean to me, or so-and-so got kicked out of school. Those all sounded overly negative. I mean, they're not all overly negative, but it led to such better conversations. And again, teaching the kids to like that. Yeah, we have ups and we have downs, and focus on what comes next. So I think it's just a good practice for them too.
So, Bob, you've put a tremendous amount of thought into how to build capacity, your own personal productivity and capacity and leadership. Could you talk about the Bob Glazer production function and just walk us through, I'm sure that there's always variation, there's trips and so forth, but what might a typical week look like for you? Curious to hear how you schedule your time, what your mornings look like, just things that you do to be productive and how you block that out.
Yeah, well, it looks like Groundhog Day these days, right? not going anywhere. Nights and everything look the same. But yeah, there are a couple of things that have worked for me. the first is a schedule based on time blocking. So my schedule is done a couple weeks out in advance, typically, and the time is allocated for the things that I want to do. So I've sort of created the free time in each day. I've created the meeting time. As someone once said to me, like, I have an open door policy, but I don't have an open door where you can't just take my time. In fact, when these salespeople and all these people reach out, like, can you talk tomorrow? I'm always like, no, I can't talk tomorrow at 2:00. So what time blocking is different. Normally, like, you make your hours available and then people just grab them all. Like, I've allocated in advance what I need to spend my time on, and I've worked with my EA on that based on my priorities. So I feel like that's me controlling my schedule, not my schedule controlling me.
Yeah. Tell me about that. So, like, what are those directions that you have? Like, how many hours do you have hours per day that you always want some free time each day, or hours that you set aside to
I
meet?
want a certain percentage of, and look, free time is a misnomer, right? What I can't, look, I'm a natural introvert, and talking to people all day long depletes my energy, even if I enjoy it. So when I say, we call it like GSD time, like get stuff done. So it's not free time. Like, there's really no free time. It's all allocated. So that will be like deliver stuff time, right? I mean, our job is not to be in meetings all day. Our job is to deliver stuff. I owe someone an article, a feedback on a presentation, a draft of a speech that I need to give. So that's sort of like production time that I need to actually do the work. And then it wouldn't even be free time, because it would be like, oh, this is a break, like a half-hour break, or this is like exercise that day from 5:00 to 6:00. So, or, my kids' stuff. Right? So part of that is knowing what I have upcoming. Like, we're going through a check-in cycle now. So I worked with my EA and made sure that I added time to do the check-ins, several days before each of them were due. But yeah, I've allocated, and if you want open office hours, great. Then you put the office hours, and then that's when people can come out of the office hours. So I've allocated all those buckets kind of in advance.
Mm-hmm. And can you give us a sense of like how many, like what percentages or kind of how many hours you allocate to different buckets? I'd love to hear, what you've landed on after probably multiple iterations.
Yeah. So I know I'm cognitively better in the morning. So I have a 2 to 3 hour least window of like get stuff done time in any day. Like, I will not let myself, unless I'm traveling, be booked for meetings 8 hours a day. Particularly with us all now home and on Zoom, the fatigue factor of Zoom just kicks in much earlier. I think if you're on video meetings all day long, it's tiring. And then I'll have breaks in there, like true breaks. Like, that's just more of a half an hour. Like, get outside. I'll have, an hour of exercise in there, and then I'll have different meetings. I think, regularly scheduled meetings, intervals, and then meetings that need to be scheduled based on priorities. And I also have speaking and presentations and stuff kind of throughout that. So, the immovables get kind of scheduled further out, and then it's kind of like the rocks and sand, and then I use the remaining time to fill in around those as things get closer.
Mm-hmm. And how do you block out the time for writing, for reading, for exercise? Do you put all those on your calendar?
Yeah, I mean, there's this GSD block, and like my AA knows that like only super top priority things can be bumped, for a GSD block, or else I'm giving everyone the time that I need to actually deliver work product. Like, I think we forget about this, right? Like, I mean, our jobs can't be meeting all day. I mean, maybe if you're a leader of a big team, it is meeting all day, but like, there's a production element to our roles that requires time to actually deliver and finish and edit things. So to me, that I always have that scheduled in.
Oh, I totally agree. With my team, we meet half an hour a week. That's it. No more meetings. If there's some issue that like we need to discuss, we'll have a quick phone call, like 5 minutes, boom. But I don't like meetings. either.
Well, you also, I mean, you have your regular cadences, right? So I have biweekly check-ins with stuff from people on my team. So unless it's an emergency, like I keep a list and they keep a list and we kick it to that check-in, because I'd rather sit down for half hour, 45 minutes and work through a bunch of things with my team than, then just most of the stuff is not immediate, but then just to constantly distract each other, right? And say, can you talk about this thing for 5 minutes? Well, yeah, it's only 5 minutes, but if I was in the middle of editing, deeply work on editing chapter of my book, like now it might take me kind of half an hour to get back into that after that 5-minute question.
Yeah, when it breaks your flow, right?
Yeah.
So, we didn't talk about on this episode, but just before we break, give listeners an overview of what your firm does. We didn't actually get into Acceleration Partners, who you're doing a lot more than writing the Friday Forward email each week.
Yeah, that's just my night job and weekend job. Acceleration Partners is a leading affiliate and partner marketing agency. So we help build like digital partner marketing programs for fast-growing and enterprise brands, and we do that on a global basis. So we have about 170 people across, I think 6 or 7 countries now, so those partners promote a product and service of a brand, and they get paid when there's actually an outcome from that, when someone uses or buys the product. So it's kind of a way of almost thinking of like a digital form of marketing, but that has more of a business development partnership angle to it.
Very helpful. And where is the best place for people to sign up for Friday Forward, to get your weekly email, and to find out more about you?
Yeah, so everything is integrated at robertglazer.com, so they can listen to my Elevate podcast there, sign up for Friday Forward, see the books. If they're interested in more in what we do or how we can help them with an affiliate program, it's probably easier to just Google Acceleration Partners. Most people misspell it, and you'll find us that way. It's accelerationpartners.com.
Fantastic. Bob, thank you so much for joining today. Really love the discussion. Love your book, and we'll include links to it in the show notes. It's been great chatting with you.
Thanks again, Will.